Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to our January live hangout. Thank you for joining us. I am Jason.
And I'm Nick.
And this is the Movie Club Emporium. And again, every month, we're here live on the Twitch. We're also every week on the YouTube. So make sure you follow us there at the Movie Club Emporium. This month, we are doing 90s Schlock January. It is my favorite theme month. So this week, I have to do some math in my head. I believe the episode going up is our episode on First Power. So Nick and I did a review on the First Power, aka We Have the Fallen at Home.
Yes. The Fallen, but with Lou Diamond Phillips in place of Denzel Washington. Which goes about how you would expect.
Make sure you follow us there and follow us here. Now, this week, or this month, I should say, most people are going to be doing their best of and worst of lists. We said, number one, we got to catch up on stuff. And number two, we're not only talking a fun topic tonight, but we also have a movie to review. And so we are doing our review on the new A24 film, The Iron Claw, as well as talking about the Graps. The squared circle, or as Werner Herzog calls it, the WrestleMania. We're talking wrestling movies and other such things. I'm excited about this topic.
There's a shortage of pro wrestling movies, which is interesting, especially considering that, predetermined pro wrestling is something that dates back at least 100 years, if not before. And it's been popular in various regions of the country all that time since. But it's rarely has a movie come out about pro wrestling and it's been very successful. And more rarely than that has a movie come out about pro wrestling and it's actually good. So, but there are some. And we're going to talk about those tonight because we have some good ones. We have some hilariously bad ones, and I'm looking forward to talking about it because I have a weak spot for pro wrestling movies.
So just to give you some bona fides, just because I've been on Twitter, I know what the internet wrestling community looks like, and I don't want them mad at me. So we'll kind of go over our history with wrestling. I grew up on it. But weirdly enough, I didn't grow up on it. Most guys our age, it was like my dad watched it, or I had that uncle that watched it, or my grandpa watched it. I didn't. It was just something I kind of stumbled on, mid 90s. So like the peak of gimmick wrestling, you had the Hulkster and every other wrestler they had a job. It was like preparing me for the workforce. They were trash can collectors or some were like party clowns. There was a hillbilly.
Plumber.
Yeah.
Plumbers, hockey players.
Yeah. Wild men from other countries.
Which got some of those gimmicks about wild men from other countries didn't particularly age well. Looking at you, Kamala. Yeah.
And then of course, being in that sweet spot of a 13, 14-year-old boy, right as the peak of hell yeahs, and if you smell what we're cooking, and telling people to suck it, and the height of wrestling, as it were. And I watched it regularly up until through high school. It kind of got big again when our friend Lee moved down because he was huge into it. So him and I would watch it a lot into college, and then right until a little after I got married, I would watch it on a weekly basis. And then Amber was like, "This is," and I was like, "Shut up! No, it's not." Fine, I'll turn it. And then kind of just weaned off of it until about probably 2016. And then Ashton was like, "Hey, Dad, I've heard of this thing called it's called wrestling. Have you ever heard of it? Because it's kind of awesome." And I was like, "Sit down, boy. Let me fill you in." And so he was hardcore into it. I got way back into it watching with him. And then at some time in like 2021, I was like, "Hey, you want to watch that wrestling thing?" He's like, "No, I don't care for wrestling anymore, old man." And so he just kind of left me holding the bag. So I don't watch it regularly. I'm morally, there's a couple of podcasters that I follow that kind of are fun and don't just like scream about, again, this very athletic but scripted storyline. And so I dip my toes in from time to time. What about you, Nick? How many wrestling buddies did you own?
No wrestling buddies. I got into it because my dad watched it back in the day. It's funny. It's like thinking back, it's kind of an odd thing that my dad didn't necessarily seem like the type that would be into it, but he was. And as far back as I can remember in the 80s, during the Hulk Hogan era and whatnot, where things were really cartoonish, and WWF and Jim Crockett Promotions, which later became WCW. I watched it a lot. We watched both shows. Um, we got to see the rise of WCW. We got to see a lot of the cool cartooning gimmicks. We watched it. My dad kind of got out of it about the mid 90s. I would say 96 or 97. He kind of exited it and kind of stopped watching it. You know, it's cyclical. The people you like and the gimmicks you like, the storylines, they got to rotate them out. And what was coming in at the time was more of the attitude area, more of what you got into. And I just don't think he found that as appealing. Plus, I think my mom gave him a hard time about it. So, but I loved watching with my dad. It, I really liked the villains that scared me. Like, I will never forget Jake the Snake Roberts unleashing a cobra on Macho Man Randy Savage. That blew my mind. I could not believe that. It's like, Dad, how is he getting away with unleashing a snake on that guy? Um, and I like some of the cartoony gimmicks, like Arachnaman, which was a very short-lived character, a terrible character, but of course it appealed to me. Giant Gonzalez, El Gigante, who he couldn't wrestle for shit. But let me tell you, you're 7 or 8 years old and you see a dude that is 7'6" wearing a caveman suit. It's cool. It blew my mind. It's like I couldn't believe that guy existed. An early one that left a big impression on me was Razor Ramon. Scott Hall, because he was just such a hateable scumbag, and I hated him. But that was my experience with wrestling. Is a lot of fond memories growing up watching it with my dad. And that's the era that interests me the most, just because of my own personal history with it. And I watched wrestling a little bit in the mid 2000s during the Ruthless Aggression era. I had a friend in the army whose name was Jay that we would get together and watch it some. I wasn't as hardcore into it, but I claim to fame as I watched it a little bit at the time, and I got to see the Chris Benoit tribute show.
Oh
One of
yeah.
the few that did.
Oh
So,
yeah.
yeah, watch that in Germany. And the next day, I was like, ooh, boy, that was a bad idea. If you don't know about Chris Benoit, look into it, or
Or
preferably
don't.
watch the
Or
dark side
don't
of the
look
ring
into
about it.
it.
Warn you, just to warn you, it gets real dark. I
Yeah.
mean, about as dark as you can get. Anywho, uh, and as I've gotten older here, I don't really keep up with current wrestling in any kind of meaningful way. I'll watch some matches here and there, um, and some highlight reels. But what fascinates me a lot is wrestling history, and I watch a lot of older events, and I like seeing all the various documentaries like Dark Side of the Ring about wrestling as it was, and all the YouTube uh, commentators, and listen to a lot of like Jim Cornette talk about wrestling because he's hilarious, and Brian, why
Flash.
is his name escaping? What?
Right. Oh no.
Brian Last is on the Jim Cornette.
Yeah. Bruh.
He has a channel, Wrestling with Regret. His name's escaping me.
Brian Zane.
Yes. But because wrestling's interesting, but the stories that went on behind the scenes are so fascinating. And you don't have to be a fan of pro wrestling to find that stuff interesting, because as wild as pro wrestling is, when they're out there in the squared circle, it is 10 times crazier behind the scenes. Especially back if you look in the 70s and 80s, it was wild. And it seems to be a bottomless well of entertainment. So that's my history with pro wrestling.
So everybody relax. We're able to talk about it. Although I will say, 5 minutes into the live and we brought up the Rabid Wolverine. That's not a good sign. But it may remind you that there are a lot of parts of wrestling, that have a terrible darkness to them, including parts of the real story of the movie that we're going to review. So do you want to do that review first?
Yeah, let's knock that out. Let's go straight into it.
All right, she's gonna change the background. Here's a little how the sausage is made. We're gonna change the background because if you're here live, you're seeing it now. But if you're not here live, then you're gonna have to wait till the 1st of February to see this review on YouTube. So pays to be here early. Doesn't always happen this way.
Logan.
Yeah. I mean, please, by all means, go watch it again when it drops. Let's get those views.
Put it on in loop in the background.
Yeah, just turn it back. We have enough episodes now. I should put them on a playlist. Just turn them on and let that play 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Let's rack them up. All right, let me get my notes here for the Iron Claw. And we'll get this bad boy introed in. It's still so weird with these bulky headphones. All right. You ready? Hey guys, and welcome back to the Movie Club Emporium. This week we are talking about a movie that came out right at the tail end of last year. But we've run out of themes, at least until summer, so let's talk about some different movies, and we are starting off with quite the doozy, because we are talking about the, at the time, newest A24 movie, The Iron Claw. Written and directed by Sean Dunker. Read your own handwriting, Jason. Dunker. And of course, this stars Zac Efron, Jeremy Allen White, and Harris Dickinson, and of course the always fabulous and will always be one of my favorite parts of Creepshow 2's Holt McCallany. Yes. You probably know him from Mindhunters, but he'll always have awesome hair, and he's going to Hollywood because of it. The Iron Claw, and we'll get all the jokes out of the way early because this is not. This is a pretty deep movie. With that being said, Nick, I will let you start off. Do you want to kind of summarize or where we are with this movie, how your thoughts are, or kind of what the movie is about in general?
So, the Iron Claw has to do with the legendary wrestling dynasty family, the Von Erichs. The father, Fritz Von Erich, was a notorious heel wrestler in the 50s and 60s who gained a lot of fame and notoriety for portraying a Nazi villain in pro wrestling, which didn't exactly make him popular. And that actually plays into part of the movie, because legend has it that a Holocaust survivor put a curse on him because of his portrayal of that. Because back when he was wrestling, they had to put off everything as being real. So people are like, oh, he's really a Nazi. Anyway, so he plays this wrestling character, and he goes on, and he and his wife have 6 sons. he goes on to start his own wrestling promotion right in the heart of Dallas, Texas, World Class Championship Wrestling. And he coerces or pushes his sons into going into wrestling. And there's 6 sons in all. And the family dealt with tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, a shocking amount, a lot of it happening in the space of about 10 years. And the Iron Claw covers some of what happened before the tragedies really got going and the aftermath and the fallout of the family. This is a real event that really happened. So I don't know, I'm on the fence of how much to spoil things. There's a lot of death. There's suicide. There's all manner of terrible things. And I said it's a very sad movie, but it's dealing with a very sad and very real subject matter of the absolute tragedy that was unleashed upon this family that did not let up. And you get to see some of what the sons getting into wrestling and the impact it's had on his life and the impact the way their parents were had on their life. The main character, the main focal point of the movie is the brother Kevin Von Erich, who is the oldest surviving brother. Uh, there were originally 6 Von Erich brothers. One of them, Jack, died when I believe he was 5 or 6 years old in just a tragic accident. I believe I think he like got electrocuted and drowned in a puddle. It was one of those absolute freak accidents. But that kind of spurred things off, in a family and kind of set this idea in people's collective consciousness about there being a curse on the family. But Kevin, you get to see how he interacts with the rest of his family and a lot of his personal life. And you get to see the rest of the brothers and their unique personalities and what they did before wrestling and during wrestling, and follows along. You get to see it takes place over about 15 or 16 years of their lives. You get to see a little bit before that, but it takes place from, I would say, the late 70s through the early to mid 90s is the time frame. So you get to see a very interesting 2 eras in wrestling in this movie of the more what was called the smaller wrestling territories and kind of the big 80s boom of pro wrestling. So that's the backdrop of the movie, and the movie just deals in, I say tragedy, just unrelenting tragedy. And it's a gut punch of a movie. So it makes me sad just seeing her talking about it. This movie had a very deep emotional impact on me. And if you went in blind and even if you didn't care about pro wrestling, I think you'd still get a lot out of this movie. Being a pro wrestling fan is not required at all to go in and enjoy this movie. So that's kind of the brief synopsis without going into far too much detail. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it is a movie that takes place in the world of wrestling. But to me, it definitely is more about kind of this relationship, the relationship of the brothers, dealing with that, the expectations of family, and then again, just the utter grief that destroys this family, just like wave after wave. And yeah, growing up where we did, this was all wrestling before we got into wrestling, before we were old enough to even be alive somewhat or watch wrestling. But definitely growing up in Southwest Oklahoma, you knew the name Funk and you knew the name Von Erich. Whether you watched wrestling or not, you had somebody in your family that could tell you all about the Von Erich. And yeah, trying to And even though in the movie they kind of combine two brothers into one to kind of almost reprieve a little bit of the grief, it's still very, still man, it's a tough sit. I definitely recommend the Dark Side of the Ring episode about the Von Erichs. Because you get to you get the story, but you also get kind of Kevin in his own words, talking about his brothers. And to me, that's the most heartbreaking part of this movie is not so much, yes, the events that lead to so many deaths, they're all tragic, but it's just first being these brothers dealing with it and then dwindling down to one brother dealing with everything just heaped upon him. I don't know if he's going to get overlooked or not because this is a pretty stacked year. But I can't think of a lot of performances that are better than Zac Efron.
Zac Efron being the main character, Kevin Von Erich, and the sole surviving brother of the Von Erichs. And that's the name of that Dark Side of the Ring episode, is The Last of the Von Erichs. Where the one area this movie absolutely excels is the performances, and it wouldn't work without a strong lead. Zac Efron has proven himself to be a very versatile actor. He does such a fantastic job of selling the heart-wrenching emotion of Kevin Von Erich and the things he goes to and the optimism and, living up to his familial expectations, being the oldest surviving brother. And, this was not an easy role to pull off because it's a very emotionally deep role. Plus, he had to learn how to wrestle. And let me tell you, Zac Efron, he learned how to wrestle. Holy cow. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention, he got incredibly jacked for this movie. Zac Efron, always very fit guy. He was huge in this movie. Muscular-wise, he's still, the fairly short guy, but he looked like a big dude in this movie, and that impressed me. And there was one scene where he's on the ring and, like, doing flips on the ring, and it's just like he's really doing it. And it's like he is that athletic. And had read some about all the rigorous training they went through to learn pro wrestling moves and get trained. I believe Chavo Guerrero trained them. Let me tell you, it shows.
Yeah,
but I agree. I think Zac Efron should absolutely get nominated for an Oscar. I think who else should get nominated for an Oscar for Best Supporting Actor is Holt McCallany.
Yes.
As Fritz Von Erich, the father, the patriarch of the Von Erich family. He puts on what I would say is the best performance of his career, and that's saying something because he's been in the game a while. But he portrays Fritz in a way that, to my understanding, seems pretty accurate to reality. Fritz centered his wrestling promotion for a lot of years around his sons, and that put a lot of pressure on his sons. And you can see that in the way his performance comes through, of the lofty expectations that he puts on them, even when they're struggling, even when they're hurting or injured. It's like, you have to push through. You have to do this no matter what. It became quite apparent that the wrestling business came above his own son's well-being, and that's tragic. And you get to see a little bit. You get to see Holt McCallany in a flashback scene in the '60s, like doing some wrestling as well and playing his heel persona. I was blown away by how well he did in this movie, and he stole quite a few scenes. But beyond that, I think The one exception, which I'll get to later, they did a stellar job casting this movie.
Yeah.
I think it's like David Von Erich, who was really blowing up at one point. I wasn't familiar with this actor.
For David,
but he acts
Harris Dickinson who played
Harris
David.
Dickinson. He's a tall guy like David was, and he looked the part. And when he got on the mic in the wrestling scene and cut a promo, he sounded like he had been doing that for years. I was impressed by how well he did that, and he added some levity to scenes. He had some funny parts, and there is some levity in this movie. And between the sadness, there's some funny moments.
Oh, the scene at the wedding, that's probably my favorite scenes of the whole movie.
Oh, it's excellent. It's yeah, it's like thinking back. It's a movie that after I watched it, I just kind of sat there dwelling on it for a while and kind of letting it sink in. But you get to see it. I believe I think it's 1983 or 1984 when the tragedy really starts rolling, and you get a good feeling of the brothers and their various personalities, which I think are very well fleshed out. Like Mike Von Erich, another actor, not familiar with him, but I think that was one of the more difficult roles in it because he's the musician, the outlier. He didn't really want to go into wrestling. He's more interested in the production aspect, and that was shot down. He was pushed into it, and man, did it have dire consequences. His story arc was, out of the brothers who perished, possibly the most sad. How that all unfolded, and there's some stellar acting because at one point he's dealing with the after effects of having some severe trauma and having to do a press conference, and that was some acting. The acting in this movie is incredible. And this is the kind of story that if you had some really crappy acting of people who couldn't really sell it, it could have been a bad movie. It could have been laughable, but it wasn't. I'm truly impressed by the cast and how well they pulled everything together, how well the justice they did to their characters, and putting in the time to do in-ring work. That was amazing.
Yeah. I will say, as far as filmmaking, you can definitely tell it's an A24 movie. It has that beautiful, smoky, soft glow of an A24 movie. It also has a scene that I really liked, but it's a scene similar to the ending of The Whale, where the movie gets oddly, almost supernaturally spiritual. I won't give it away, and it's not bad; it doesn't take away from it at all. But I was just like, oh, I know why we did it, and the movie kind of probably needed it, but it's just a weird kind of turn there toward the end. I think you know what I'm talking about.
I do, which I love that was the scene that made me tear up.
Yeah,
that scene. It was, especially when they got to the dock. It was a very bittersweet moment, but man, that's the one. That's it. That's where I cried a little bit. So, and there's several moments throughout which can do that to you in this movie. The filmmaking, beautifully shot movie. It's a period piece. It's set in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s, and it always looks like it with the wardrobe, with the restaurants, the cars, everything. That's something I always look for in movies because I'm looking for somewhere they messed up. Never saw it. I thought that was the time period at every step of the way. I know we spoke before. There was apparently some rumblings that people weren't terribly happy with some of the wrestlers they chose, like Ric Flair, like Harley Race. Guy that got to play Ric Flair. Here's the thing: there's only one Ric Flair.
Yeah.
he's going to be a very hard guy to portray anyway, which is why it's like they
without
should
it being
never
a
try to do.
caricature or like
Yes,
like a guy doing an imitation.
that's why there'll probably never be a biopic or at least a good one on him because it would be too difficult to pull off.
Yeah.
So I will say, I think the guy that got to play Harley Race, I think they nailed it. That was a great scene, and that dude, he looked like Harley Race.
And you get a little double dipping because Chavo plays the Sheik in it too.
Oh
So
yeah, that's
it's
right.
the most people have hated Chavo Guerrero since he changed his name to Kerwin White in 2005. That's for you, wrestling community.
The most baffling gimmick changes ever. And you get to see a blink and you'll miss it cameo by MJF as Lance Von Erich.
The fake Von Erich.
That was in a scene who was not actually a Von Erich brother. Fritz Von Erich, in his infinite wisdom, after one of his sons died, decided they needed another Von Erich brother, so recruited a guy to pretend to be a member of their family. It went poorly, to say the least. Real poorly. If you're like, that's an incredibly poor taste, you're not wrong. It wasn't very poor taste. And that's, I was kind of surprised that they didn't delve into that a little bit.
So from what I heard was that there was a lot more shot with him, but just a lot of it was just cut to kind of streamline more with the brothers, kind of focus that story. And same with kind of why they combined Mike and Chris into kind of one character.
So I'm going to go into a few of the things I took issue with. Going into it, that's the thing, I can't help it. I know a lot about this story. I do. My number one big issue, and the thing that had me reaching for my phone to look it up was, as you just mentioned, they left out an entire brother. They did. They left out Chris Von Erich, who is the youngest brother, who also died tragically. I understand streamlining things, but I think that was such a massive misstep to leave out the brother. He was the baby brother of the family. You know, he was a little kid when a lot of this was going on, and that I think he kind of got lost in the shuffle. And he wanted to be a wrestler so bad, but he had a lot of health problems. He had brittle bones. He had asthma. Plus, he was drastically smaller. The brothers were 6'1" and above, and these, for the most part, pretty athletic dudes. And Chris is 5'5", and just with all these health issues, it was never going to happen for him. He was never going to make it as a wrestler, but he wanted it so bad, and I think that's part of the reason he ended up taking his life later on when he was only 21 years old. I think they did the family, and especially Chris, a disservice by leaving him out entirely. I don't think it would have been a huge deal to put him in the movie. I think they could have had him in there, and since he was a kid for so much of the story, had him in there in the background, and kind of have that be part of the plot where he's more in the background. He's not as much the focal point, and he wants some of the attention on him, but his brothers are taking the spotlight. I think, and this whole thing about not wanting to add more tragedy to it, it's a tragic story. It's no matter what you do, it's a tragic story, and having more tragedy and being more true to life, I think Chris deserved to have his story told. And I hate that he didn't. That was the thing that bothered me more than any other. I also wondered if part of the reason they didn't throw him in there was they made some interesting casting choices in this movie. One casting choice I had a problem with from the beginning was Jeremy Allen White as Kerry Von Erich. Kerry Von Erich was a big dude. He was 6'2", about 260 pounds. He looked a lot like the Ultimate Warrior, just stacked muscle.
Well, physically, Zac Efron looks like Kerry Von Erich. Like, aside from that terrible He-Man haircut, but just his physique, he's just
yes,
muscles in a bag. It's just insane how ripped he was.
But it's like Kerry was. Kerry was even bigger than that. I mean, you see some
Yeah.
of the pictures, especially the mid to late 80s, when he was on a lot of steroids, admittedly. He was huge. Jeremy Allen White is about 5'7" and weighs about 150, 160 pounds. He's a smaller guy. That's okay. And I figured, there's a lot of ways you can make a person look bigger in a movie. But all the shots of him, it was quite apparent that he was a very small guy. And that kind of took me out of it a little bit. Plus, I don't think his accent was that good. And I just don't think, from what I know of Carrie, I don't think he really captured Carrie very well, physically or performance wise. And Jeremy Allen White's a very good actor. I just think this is the case where it was miscast. I know a lot of other people don't feel that way, but everyone else in the movie I bought without question. He was like, and I know Zac Efron, he's shorter than Kevin Von Erich. He is. But he had the presence and looked bigger.
Yeah.
I just couldn't buy Jeremy Allen White as Carrie. I couldn't.
Yeah.
They had to get the smallest guy of the brothers to play the most jacked brother, and it was weird. But it didn't work. I think, accent wise, the other people in the movie did really well, and it's just Jeremy Allen White sound kind of artificial. That's two of my issues. I have more, but I'll let you chime in.
No, like I know we couldn't dive as much into the WWF stuff because, the WWF wouldn't sign off on it, but I kind of wanted to look because that's what I know of like their wrestling footage is those old WrestleManias, having those on DVD and seeing, Texas Tornado wrestling. And there's I believe it's that and then the foot stuff. Like we really should lean into the foot stuff because there's a match. So if you don't know, he was in Kerry Von Erich. He was the one who kind of broke out. He got to the big league. I know David had gone to Japan and was going to wrestle for All Japan, perhaps New Japan, but Kerry was the one that made it. He made it to the WWF. And he did so even after a horrific motorcycle accident where he lost his foot. And he wrestled with a wooden foot wrapped in a stocking in his shoe. And I think you can even find maybe you can find the match online. There's a match of him and Mr. Perfect having like a banger 5-star match. And the guy's wrestling on one foot and like a club. But yeah, like I kind of like you said, he's so small. He's so small. And I remember I haven't watched The Bear, so I don't know a lot of his acting. I haven't watched The Bear. I haven't seen Shameless. So I wasn't really aware of like how well of an actor he was. But yeah, just even in the trailers and stuff, you're just like, he's the little one. Like he honestly could have been the young one. Like if you were gonna do that last brother, have him play the little one.
When they announced it, that's what I figured. I figured he's going to play Chris, and I think he could have done very well in that role. They're very similar in size, which is kind of, if you wanted somebody who looked like a runt next to him, you'd have to get somebody who's 5 foot tall.
Yeah.
That also presents a problem with casting of throwing Chris in the movie because of some of the people they chose. Yeah, that really surprised me that they didn't go more into that. Because there was a match that Kerry was a part of in which his boot with his prosthetic foot in it came off in the middle of the match and it was exposed. He managed to keep that a secret for years. It's a testament to how great of a wrestler he was. Wrestling is a very physical and very difficult thing to do. Doing it after a horrific motorcycle accident and missing a foot, that is amazing. And it goes into it. You see a little bit of the footage of Kerry training, and dealing with immense pain, trying to train for a comeback, after this horrific wreck. And there was more. I think they could have done more with that. I think they could have. I would have loved it if they would have shown that match where that happened, and it's just such an embarrassing moment for him. And I think you could have shown more of his anguish, and it would have made the meaning of, when he comes back to his house and he's strung out on drugs and dealing with all these issues. It could have given it more, gravity. And it leads to another issue of, I think this movie should have been longer. It feels more towards the end. The pacing is a little uneven. And towards the end, it feels like it kind of rushes through some things. In an era where where 3-hour movies are normal, this could have at least been a 2.5-hour movie. It could have easily been a 3. And you could have covered more stuff. You might have been able to cover some of the aftermath, because there was more tragedy after that carried on into the 90s and all. And that being said, though, I think the ending of the movie the final scene is fantastic and heart-wrenching. The pacing could have been better. It could have been longer. And I heard some people complain that it's like the movie goes, you get some backstory, that it's tragedy, 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 tragedy. I get that, and that's true to an extent. So, and I think making it longer would have fixed some of the pacing issues. Yeah. The pacing's not terrible. It's just, it feels like it speeds up a bit too much towards the end.
Yeah, like it wants to end the suffering itself. Yeah, it's definitely one of the best of this particular genre of wrestling movies, but no, I think it's a beautiful love letter to not just this family, but kind of like I said, the idea of brothers, and dealing with family loss and dealing with it as a family, and being there for your family, whether blood or not, but just that kinship, and how you're able to handle so much, again, so much adversity. Because like you said, it didn't end when the all the stuff in the movie happens. Like, you get into what happened to Fritz in his old age, and so much so that Kevin like packed up and like moved to Hawaii so he wouldn't lose his mind. Yeah, definitely check it out. It should be streaming on Max, I believe, because Max signed that A24 deal. There's several different documentaries. I highly recommend the Dark Side of the Ring episode on it, because you kind of get to see Kevin himself kind of to talk about how great his brothers were. But it's such a sad story, but it's also a story knowing now that Kevin's sons are wrestlers and are kind of on that plateau of making it into the quote unquote major leagues of wrestling, is kind of cool to see that even with all this tragedy, that if something's in your blood, it's in your blood, and there's no escaping it. So yeah, but bring Kleenex, because you're gonna need it.
I know it sounded a little bit like I was being pretty harsh on this movie, and there were some things, partially just because of going there with knowledge, that I did take issue with. But make no mistake, I think this is an excellent movie. I think this is one of the best pro wrestling movies ever made. I think it's an extraordinarily well put together movie. The acting's amazing. I highly recommend seeing it. I think a lot of the people, if you go on without the awareness of what happened to them, I doubt most people would have the same issues. Like, I watched it with Tommy, and he absolutely loved it. He's one of his best movies of the year. And there were a few things that bothered me just because I knew, and that's not terribly fair to the movie on its own, because I think a movie should be able to stand alone on its own and on its own merits. I think it's great. I I couldn't get over how great the acting was and just some of the beautiful scenes and the tragedy. And man, it takes a lot for a movie to make me tear up, and this one did it. And my wife, after we left, she had to like sit there in silence for a while, started crying on the way home.
Yeah.
It's that kind of movie. But I hope this gets some nominations. I really do. And if there's any justice, it will.
It's Zac Efron's time, man. He's been the best part in a lot of terrible movies. So but now that he's the best part of this really great movie, let's throw him a bone. But that is the Iron Claw. Next week, join us where we're going to lighten the mood just a scotch, because my lovely wife has recommended that I watch and review a little movie called Zombievers. So, tune in for that next week. Really, really like hard swinging that pendulum from heartbreaking awards movie to Zombievers. So until then, I'm sure you know what? I'm gonna save all my wood jokes for next week. I don't wanna push my limits. Until then, I will see you guys next time. All right. Bye.
Later, y'all.
All right, we're out. Woo!
I'm gonna take a quick potty break. I'll be right back, and we'll continue on.
Yes. I will look here at the chat. Let's go. So, Logan, have we got the pizza yet? Like, where are we at on what's ETA on pizza? I need to know. I may be mean, I may be a jerk, but I'm kind of hoping that the second pizza also has anchovies on it. They're like, oh no! And it just becomes a shenanigan evening of you just getting fish pizza after fish pizza. And I'm sorry. That's terrible, but it would be funny. Hopefully you'll score big like we did a few weeks ago where we ordered pizza and wings and they got our order wrong and we ended up with like 40 free wings because they kept giving us the wrong order. And we kept the wings. But regardless of what goes on here tonight, I need to know where we are at that pizza. And yeah, that's true. I reached out to my wife and son and was like, hey guys, why don't you pick some movies for us to review while we don't have anything in the theater right now, because our theater here is terrible. I think right now we have Night Swim, which I probably should go see because it's already slated to be probably the worst movie of the year. The Mean Girls musical that they refused to tell you was a musical. And then 2 screens out of our 4-screen theater are playing the Duck animated movie. Small town theaters. You gotta love it. But she picked, she's like, Zombievers. So I'm not sure why she had that one in the chamber ready to go, but so I'm like, well, you're gonna have to watch it with me. I refuse to let them, if they pick it, they have to watch it with me. It's only fair. That goes back to when we were doing our podcast, and I let Ashton pick an episode, and he said, you guys should do an episode on Wild Wild West, and then left and didn't watch the movie, leaving us to watch Wild Wild West by ourselves. So from now on, if you pick the movie, that's what I told Ashton, I was like, you pick the movies you want, but if you pick a movie, pretend like you're going to be watching with me, because you are. Yeah, I called you out on it. He came out of his dark recess of his room, of his teenage room, to be like, Dad, bro,
When does he turn 16? Soon,
October.
right?
October.
Yeah.
Don't cry. Mama Bear was crying. Also, just so you are aware, I have put out to Logan that regardless of how tonight goes, I need an ETA on that pizza.
So,
Ugh.
we talk about some more of the wrestling genre.
Yeah. Let's talk about some more wrestling movies.
Wrestling.
There
We're just gonna do this
were.
as a we're gonna
Go
do
ahead.
this as a casual conversation, and
Oh yeah, I
just
didn't rank anything. Just wrote down some ones that I felt like should be mentioned, good and bad. So where do you want to start? Or do you want me to?
well, let's go down my list here. An unlikely wrestling hit that came out, I believe, is the late 2000s, starring Jack Black, kind of in the wake of the quirky Napoleon Dynamite movies, is Nacho Libre. It's not a serious movie at all, but it's a love letter to the Mexican luchador style of wrestling that, bizarrely enough, is based on a completely true story uh, about a friar that donned a wrestling mask and went and wrestled to help support orphans. And that's what Nacho Libre is about. Jack Black plays this priest or friar. I don't know how those ranks work exactly. Anyway, he works at an orphanage, and he's a member of the Catholic Church down in Mexico, this kind of rural church. And things are kind of desperate there, so he decides to get into the very colorful world of Mexican pro wrestling, and antics ensue. He ends up getting this eccentric partner, and it's such a fun movie. I love Nacho Libre. I watched it a few years back to see if it holds up, and I think it holds up. Is it kind of dumb? Yes, but I love it.
So, being in high school / college when not Napoleon Dynamite came out, and having it utterly ruined by everybody, uh, much like middle school was ruined by people doing Austin Powers impressions. Uh, I was sick of Napoleon Dynamite, and so when this first came out, I was like, absolutely not. I can't take another Napoleon Dynamite movie. And then later watched it on DVD and was like, this movie's fantastic. Uh, and then we rewatched it probably 5 years ago to show it to Ashton for the first time. And I think it may be my favorite of these types of movies. It's definitely my favorite of this guy's filmography. Although Gentleman Broncos is up there, but I love Nacho Libre.
Thank you for being somebody else who appreciates Gentleman Broncos. I love Gentleman Broncos. We need to review that. In fact, we can review the guy's whole filmography. Yes, Amber in the chat. It is based, Nacho Libre is based off the real life story of Mexican priest Sergio Gutierrez Benitez, aka wrestled as Fray Tormenta. Yes. It's one of those that I don't think most people know that, but it's like it's a real thing that happened. And he really helped feed orphans through wrestling. And he kept his identity secret for a very long time. You know, which is something that they could just kind of do down in Mexico anyway. As a luchador, you keep your identity secret. You keep your mask on in public. It's part of the selling the story. And nobody does pro wrestling like Mexico, and I love it. And I love how interesting and colorful the wrestling scenes of this movie are. And I love especially the final battle royale. And Jack Black's just a treasure, and I think he's great in this.
Yeah.
He's really funny, got a lot of good physical comedy. This is one of my favorite roles of his.
The partner, the actor, he kills me. He almost steals this movie from Jack Black, who is almost impossible to steal a movie from, but he almost does. He's so fantastic. Yeah, I'm glad we were able to talk about some luchador because part of me wanted to put Jesus Christ Vampire Hunter on this list because it does have El Santo in it. And he fought vampires, but I left it off. But speaking of weird wrestlers fighting monsters, I have a movie that you need to see ASAP. And it's called Kaiju Mono. It's from 2016. And it is about this kaiju monster that attacks Japan. And it's running amok like they always do. And so this scientist finds a way to try to stop the kaiju. And so he injects this man, kind of a goofy little nerdy guy, and he becomes giant Kota Ibushi, former IWGP
Federation.
Yeah, the IWGP World Heavyweight Champion Kota Ibushi, in just black underpants. And you watch this wrestler wrestle this giant kaiju in a Godzilla cardboard city. And it is fantastic. And only if that hasn't sold it yet, when we have to super duper the good guy, we inject him again and he becomes famous pancrase fighter / wrestler Minoru Suzuki, also in black trunk, who just beats the ever-living shit out of this giant Godzilla knockoff in like model Tokyo.
Minoru Suzuki, I must just say, is one of the most badass human beings to ever come out of Japan. MMA pioneer, pro wrestling legend, and 30 years after he got going, he is still doing it.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to have to give that a watch. There's another similar movie that I put on the list of movies I want to watch called The Calamari Wrestler, which is also about Japanese pro wrestling, and this dude dresses as a squid and wrestles in a squid costume, and it's supposed to be hilarious and great. So that's one. Yeah, I need to watch that.
As somebody who saw my fair share of mid-aughts TNA with Shark Boy, which if you've never seen that, you need to YouTube you some TNA Shark Boy.
I'm familiar with Shark Boy.
Okay, give me a shell, yeah.
Reaching back in time into the 80s and the rock and wrestling connection came this little oddity that seems to have been mostly forgotten, starring Roddy Piper and the Tonka Kid, aka Sam Fatu. It's Body Slam from '86. Also has Captain Lou Albano and the face man himself, Dirk Benedict. Dirk Benedict plays this seedy music manager who accidentally winds up managing this pair of pro wrestlers. So they decide to go and have this traveling act where a rock band plays while Roddy Piper and Sam Fatu wrestle. And it's kind of ridiculous. It's 80s. It's Roddy Piper being Roddy Piper. But it's a really fun movie. It's goofy. It is 80s to the absolute core. Oh, John Astin's in it? Man. A lot of interesting people in it. I caught it on TV a long time ago. It's a really fun watch. It's not hard to see at that time why kind of pro wrestling movies weren't really taken off, but it's honestly pretty reflective of the cartoonish, how cartoonish, like WWF was at that time, because it's a pretty cartoony movie.
One that I love that is in the WWE now family, but actually done very well and is it's a biopic, is Fighting With My Family. Now, the wrestler known as Paige, I think she goes by her real name now because she's not in WWE. I wasn't aware of her. She was in those years I stopped watching the eight or so years I stopped watching wrestling. I'd heard of her, after the fact, getting back into wrestling. And so they're like, oh, they're going to do this kind of biopic about her. Interesting. And it's like produced like The Rock's all over it, even though The Rock had little to do with actually Paige getting to wrestle. but we needed The Rock for something. This was a surprisingly charming little movie. Number one is directed by Stephen Merchant, co-creator of The Office. Some might say the funny one from The Office. Take that, Ricky Gervais. Also has Florence Pugh, and you can't go wrong with Florence Pugh.
She's great.
Nick Frost and Lena Headey play her parents, and there's a hilarious scene in the movie where she's trying to get tryouts to NXT, and her parents own a small wrestling promotion in England. They're from England, and there's just this hilarious scene of Nick Frost, who plays her dad, and another gentleman. They're getting ready to have a hardcore match, and so they're like debating back and forth, almost like bargaining of what kind of objects they're allowed each other to hit each other in the nuts with. It's so funny. He's like, "We gotta take a bowling ball." He's like, "No. What about like a tennis racket?" Absolutely a charming little movie. She's fantastic. I know the timeline's all weird with it, but again, for a wrestler I wasn't aware of watching during this stage in her career, it's a fun little heartwarming movie of just kind of like, it's a real girls do it too movie, and it's a really fun little movie.
It was surprisingly good, and that I remember when it came out, it got so many positive reviews, and so my wife and I watched it, and it's really good. It's well acted. That's the first time I became aware of Florence Pugh, and same as you, I didn't know who Paige was, but it was an interesting, compelling, story about somebody making it to the big leagues in a huge way. And got to mention Vince Vaughn who plays a wrestling trainer in there. Not a huge role, but he does a really good job, and he has a nice monologue in there about the rigors of being on the road, which really sells, how challenging that living that life is. Great supporting cast. Also, I must say, Stephen Merchant, national treasure from the UK. I love that guy. He's amazing. But it was definitely on my list. It's one I definitely recommend as a more mainstream wrestling movie. And again, you don't have to be into wrestling to appreciate it. It's well done. It's entertaining. It's funny. It's heartwarming. I think that probably made it in my top 10 movies that year. I really liked it.
Yeah.
Now, talking about movies that aren't exactly heartwarming, but made my best list of the year, it's one that would be on the Mount Rushmore of wrestling movies, and many consider it to be the greatest wrestling movie of all time, The Wrestler, with Mickey Rourke from, I believe that's 2008.
Yes.
Directed by Darren Aronofsky. This is a unflinching view of an aging wrestler whose fame he's clinging on to the last bit of fame, working in a deli and going and playing in wrestling in gymnasiums for not nearly enough money, living in a trailer park. It is a very unglamorous view of the reality of wrestling, and especially getting older as a wrestler. Mickey Rourke, he's phenomenal in it. That is the movie that resurrected his career, because as Randy the Ram Robinson, he is so good. He sells everything in it. The pain, the frustration, the agony, all of it.
Yeah. Up until the Iron Claw, this may have been one of the saddest wrestling movies ever made. And not necessarily because of its content, but just like it's everything the best documentaries, and we'll talk about some, show you what this life does to you, both physically, mentally, sometimes financially, and what it can do to your family. And his relationship with Evan Rachel Wood is so tragic in this movie. It's and again, because it's Aronofsky, the way he makes movies, he's right in there with them. You're having to watch him play out these emotions and try to be as positive, knowing that he's performing in front of 50 people for shit pay. His body's giving out on him, and he just needs that roar of the crowd one more time. It's almost worse for his body than the drugs he does or did that put him in the shape he's in. It's just, man, it is such a sad but beautifully emotional movie.
Yeah, there's a scene in there where he's working at the deli and somebody recognizes him as being Randy the Ram Robinson, and he tries to play it off like it's like, oh no, that's not me. And it's just, you get to feel the embarrassment from that. And just see all the ways that this guy is destroying his body. He has a hardcore match with independent wrestler Necro Butcher in that movie, and it is grisly. There's thumbtacks, there's staples, and it's horrible. And just he's they're going over the match beforehand, and he's just talking about, oh, does it hurt much? He's like, well, yeah, it hurts. It just this he's debasing himself for pennies. This is where the movie opens with kind of going over some like newspaper footage of him in his heyday in the 80s, and of course it's Darren Aronofsky, so it's an incredibly well done movie. And contrary to what Hulk Hogan says, Hulk Hogan was never in the running to play Randy the Ram Robinson, even though he's continually said that. Darren Aronofsky's like, no, that was never an option.
He's like, I saw no holds barred. Get out of here.
Apparently, it's like, I know Chris Jericho and Roddy Piper watched the movie. He's like saw a lot of himself in there. He broke down crying. Chris Jericho's come out and said, that's reality. Mm-hmm. Some people thought it was a little too harsh on the wrestling business. No, I think it was very accurate.
Yep. Yeah, if anybody, it's to me, it was kind of what, to me, it's really much based on where Jake the Snake was and Beyond the Mat, which is a documentary film, which we can talk about here. I have it for later, but we can talk about it now because it was a movie. It's Beyond the Mat. It was the first big real, like, this is the wrestling business they don't want you to see. Besides that terrible, was it the Wrestling Secrets Revealed that was on Fox?
Oh god, that was good.
Stunt Granny and but Beyond the Mat is one of my favorite wrestling documentaries. There's a trio of them, and this is the kind of the middle one. And because it covers so much of the highs and lows, because you do get moments of absolute carnage, whether it's, the very famous match of The Rock and Mankind, where the Mankind took like 15 unprotected chair shots to the head, like in front of his wife and kids, to seeing, Terry Funk at his age going through these hardcore matches he was putting himself through. And then of course,
intercut with scenes where he's going to the doctor. The doctor's like, your knees are gone. You need new knees. He's like, oh, okay. Goes out and wrestles.
Yeah. And then of course the tragedy of that movie is watching Jake the Snake, who, like when I was a kid, I was terrified. Jake the Snake was one of my favorites. I love Jake the Snake. I think it was because he didn't cocaine scream. He cocaine whispered, and it made him all the more terrifying. Scarier. Yeah. But him, his daughter, dealing with her, his relationship with her, and I can't remember if it's that one. If not, for sure, another one uses the footage of that Heroes of Wrestling, where he was just bombed out of his mind.
Yeah. Actually,
Which
no. Heroes of Wrestling happened after that.
happened after that. Okay, but I mean, he's on the way.
Yeah.
He's on the way to that, where he's just drinking and pilling himself to death because it's the only way he can stop hurting.
Yeah, he goes off on one point, smokes crack.
Yeah,
He is plummeting towards the bottom with a rocket strapped to his back.
yeah. It is a harsh look, but there are some great scenes of some of the behind the scenes, mostly with the ECW stuff with Heyman. I really enjoy. If you want more behind the scenes of WWE, there's another documentary I'll bring up later, but I'll let you take a turn now.
I'm gonna guess, was the other documentary you're talking about Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows?
Mm-hmm.
We'll go straight into that then, talking about documentaries. Beyond the Mat is fantastic. I'll throw in a few thoughts on it real quick. They managed to throw a lot of interesting stuff. You get to see a little bit about some guys who are trying to break into the business. You get an interview with New Jack, who, if you're not familiar with New Jack, is probably the craziest person in pro wrestling history. The dude is nuts. Completely crazy. Not like, oh, I'm a crazy character. No, he's legit unhinged.
Yeah.
He stabbed a bunch of people in the ring, like on separate instances. Anyway, it's just like Terry Funk is just this charming dude from West Texas, and just wrestles these crazy hardcore matches where he's bleeding, but behind the scenes he's just such a sweet old guy. And in the movie he's like, "Oh, I'm doing my retirement match." Then at the end of the movie it's like Terry came out of retirement a month later.
Yeah.
He would wrestle his last match, I believe, at the age of 72, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, he was going for a while. And one funny moment that always sticks out to me is that guy who is Terry Funk's friend, him working out on the trampoline. That part always cracks me up. Beyond the Mat's great. It's an unflinching look at that era of wrestling and shows the reality. And I'm so glad that Jake has managed to bounce back from that. I don't know how he survived, because and it goes Beyond the Mat also goes into the relationship with his dad,
Grizzly Smith.
Grizzly Smith, and his relationship with his estranged daughter. The Grizzly Smith stuff is dark. I watched that episode of Dark Side of the Ring. It's no wonder why Jake was messed up. Anyway, Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows. Beyond the Mat's great. I dare say Wrestling with Shadows is even better. It follows a period of time and some of the towards the tail end of Bret the Hitman Hart, this famous wrestler from Canada, the end of his time in WWF. And this film crew follows him around, and he's, from this wrestling dynasty of a family, the Harts from Calgary, Canada. I need to get up there one of these days to the frozen tundra and go visit the Hart Dungeon. Anywho. And it's an interesting behind-the-scenes look at this man and his family and all. But what's amazing about this documentary is it manages to capture one of the most controversial moments and still talked about, still speculated about moments in wrestling, the Montreal Screwjob, which won't go into deep detail about what that is. There's a lot of YouTube videos over it, but it appeared to be a real life double cross against Bret Hart. It is amazing that they happen to be following him around at that time. Because if they'd done it a few years before, a few years after, they would have missed it entirely. Like capturing wrestling history in real time, that's amazing. I think it's a stellar documentary.
So we'll just round out this documentary trilogy, because where you leave Jake the Snake and Beyond the Mat, again, you're just like, there's no way this doesn't end like so many other wrestlers haven't. Just utter tragedy. And then a little film came out called The Resurrection of Jake the Snake. And it is one of the most what's what I'm looking for? It's empowering and kind of like inspirational documentaries you'll ever watch. Because you see Jake literally at rock bottom. And just one good friend being there to help him up, which is DDP.
Dallas Page.
Yeah, gets him into to the yoga thing, gets him clean living. And there are ups and downs, and he stumbles and falls off and things like that. But it's just him knowing that this is it. It's either you break the cycle or you become another wrestling statistic. And it ends with him getting fit, getting sober, getting to a good place with himself in order to finally like kind of be welcomed back into the wrestling world. Get into the WWE Hall of Fame. And again, you talk about just inspiring, because you're just like, this man has nothing to live for, and you get in this little movie to kind of watch him get this last bite at the apple of life. And he does. And I know he's doing manager stuff now, and he's so far living clean and safe, and it's absolutely fantastic. And it's a beautiful little piece of documentary to watch him get to that point.
Also, a hour and a half long commercial for DDP Yoga, but that's besides the point. And you get to see with DDP Yoga, the Yoga for Real Guys, a yoga system which I have been using for over 10 years now. And I also like, in there, Scott Hall shows up in the movie too, in a similar space of being in a real bad spot. And Diamond Dallas Page manages to help him out too. And the guy's a patron saint in the world of pro wrestling. But there's been a lot of other documentaries. Those are some of the more main ones. One on Netflix you can also watch is Glow, the story of the Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling, a short-lived wrestling promotion in the 80s that also has a Netflix series about it, which I think the Netflix series is quite good. On the Glow documentary, very, very entertaining, very good, heartfelt. Another one I'd recommend.
We didn't get to finish the show because Netflix could suck it, but I loved the first season for sure. I thought it was fantastic. Speaking, I know since you haven't really watched it, I won't get too much into the details of it. I will just say, tragically, the TV show Heels was canceled this year after its second season because nobody watched it, unfortunately, because it's on Stars. Which is kind of the same thing that happened to the Ash versus the Evil Dead show. Because again, nobody has Stars. Like, unless you're really into that power show. Season 1 of Heels is fantastic. It's it covers, you get all the stuff you want. You get the idea of the wrestling family. You get wrestling, small market trying to get bigger market. You get screw jobs. You get everything you could want for all the drama, and it's fantastic. And all set in this world of just a small town local promotion. Just two brothers trying to carry on their dad's local wrestling promotion. Stephen Amell is fantastic as the oldest son. You'll know him from Arrow. The actor, I can't think of his name, but he was in True Blood, and he is always will be terrifying to me as the Machine from 8mm. He's great as kind of the old wrestler, kind of not wanting to let go of the limelight. All in all, if you can find it, because again, it's on Stars. Watch Heels, because it's absolutely fantastic. Again, if you're in the wrestling sphere or not, it's still a fantastic show about family drama, even if you're not into the graps, as they say.
They should do a horror themed spinoff of it. Call it The Heels Have Eyes.
Well done, sir. Well
the
done.
Inbred Wrestling Championship. In the hills of Appalachia. Hear that, stars? I give you $1 million idea.
They'll make 2 really great seasons of it. Nobody will watch it and they'll cancel it before they can conclude it. Yes!
They're like, what do you expect? It's stars.
Yeah. Oh. And I guess we should say, well, I was going to say real quick, because we won't get into the specifics, I don't think. If you're not watching Dark Side of the Ring, and any of this stuff interests you, why are you not? Because there are 4 excellent seasons of it. Watch Dark Side of the Ring. It's dark, but there are some fun episodes, including a whole episode on how crazy New Jack was.
Yes. And I can't emphasize this enough. Dude was nuts. And he is unrepentantly crazy. He's just like, yep, I did it. I don't care. I think he ends that episode by saying his dream is to die in a pile of cocaine while he's in his wheelchair.
Yep.
So, yeah, man. And another funny episode is the one about, I think it's the Herb Abrams UWF promotion.
Yep.
The guy who died covered in Vaseline and cocaine in a room full of hookers. Yeah, that's an interesting story there. He was a fascinating character. Speaking of fascinating characters, this movie has a lot to do with pro wrestling. I included it on my list, even though some might say it's a stretch. It's a Shia LaBeouf movie from a few years back called The Peanut Butter Falcon. This adult guy with Down syndrome living in a group home sneaks out to go find his favorite wrestler's wrestling school. It goes on this journey. And Shia LaBeouf's kind of this shady fisherman that links up with him, and they go on this, it's a kind of a road movie. And they're there for each other along the way. This young guy who's the name comes from, he ends up wrestling in a match with Jake the Snake Roberts. He's not called that in the movie, but it's Jake. And he calls himself the Peanut Butter Falcon. That's his wrestling name. And he's on a mission to go to find his favorite pro wrestler called Saltwater Redneck, played by Thomas Hayden Church. It's a really sweet, heartfelt movie, and it's a shame that it's a movie that it's not gotten more recognition. It's very well done and very well acted. I imagine it could be challenging to have your main character as a guy with Down syndrome who's actually played by a guy with Down syndrome. He does an excellent job. Shia LaBeouf does great. Thomas Hayden Church sells it as this grizzled old pro wrestler. It's a very good movie.
I haven't seen it, but I'll have to definitely watch it because it's definitely better. It automatically sounds like a definitely better portrayal of somebody who is handicapable, treated better as a character than what was going on in the WWE at the time. Because I saw my fair share of Eugene matches.
Oh man!
So I have one more that is not the one I really want to talk about, but it's one that's kind of on the spectrum. And this one actually covers 2 bases because it is about wrestling, but it's also about real wrestling. But it's a wrestling movie. It is also almost equally as tragic as some of these other ones, and it's a movie that was horribly overlooked when it came out. And it's 2014's Foxcatcher. If you don't know the story of Team Foxcatcher, and John DuPont played a little overly make-upped, but nonetheless really effective by Steve Carell. There was these 2 brothers, the Schultz brothers. It's Mark Ruffalo and Channing Tatum, who are both fantastic. They were Olympian wrestlers, and John DuPont's this weird eccentric millionaire who wants to put together an Olympic team, and he called Foxcatcher, and he brings them out, and they live on his land, and we're starting this wrestling school, and we're training for the Olympics, and one thing leads to another, and the movie ends quite tragically. Based on a real story, there's also a great Netflix documentary about it. It goes into far more length, but again, a movie that it's not professional wrestling, but it is a movie with wrestling that just sadly has kind of fallen away and nobody talks about it anymore.
I'm quite familiar with the story. I've never got around to watching the movie, and I can't believe that movie came out 10 years ago now.
I know.
I could have sworn the movie was like 3 or 4 years ago. Man, time flies. Um, Fascinating story. David and Mark Schultz were the brothers and Olympians, and I mean, incredible amateur wrestlers. Incredible. And fun fact, Mark went on to fight in exactly one UFC event where he won decisively because he was that good of a wrestler. With no MMA training, because he was that good of a wrestler. I've got to mention, talking about back to 80s pro wrestling movies like Body Slam, there's one that it is a total B movie. I can't lie, it's wildly entertaining. It's No Holds Barred from, I believe it's 1987. So Vince McMahon always had, the president of WWE, always had a desire to go into the movie business. So they funded and put together a movie, this kind of action comedy, No Holds Barred. It is not a good movie. It is the goofiest movie. Hulk Hogan plays the main character, whose name in the movie is Rip. I've never been able to figure out why they didn't just call him Hulk Hogan. They made him into a different character that's identical to Hulk Hogan.
Or call him Thunderlips.
That would have been better. Nope, his name's Rip. And in the movie, pro wrestling is portrayed as an actual combat sport. Tiny Lister himself plays the villain, Zeus, who's this hulking guy with a unibrow. And it's bizarre, and you get to see, it's like there's several wrestlers who make cameos. Stan Hansen himself is in there, drooling tobacco and beating people up and being his usual Stan Hansen himself. And Peter gazing in the bathroom during a very weird scene where he's like, teeny weeny. It's a strange movie. And then there's the famous scenes like, what's that smell? Dookie! It's the kind of movie to watch with friends with a lot of alcohol. But I watched it a few times. It's dumb. It's terrible, but it's entertaining. It also bombed at the box office and dashed Vince McMahon's hopes of becoming a big movie guy.
They even brought Tiny Lister in to wrestling as his character Zeus. Like, he wrestled at a WrestleMania as Zeus against the real life Hulk Hogan.
It was bizarre, and it didn't work because Tiny Lister, not a wrestler. He's a big tanky dude, but he's not a wrestler. And he showed up in pro wrestling a few years later as Z Gangsta, as a completely different character for reasons. Because people were hankering for his comeback, I guess. But as a relic of 80s pro wrestling, it's worth a watch.
So the last one I had written down is the one we all know why we're here. Especially if you were watching wrestling while I was watching wrestling. There's a movie that is genuinely dismissed as terrible by pretty much everybody. That I absolutely nostalgically adore. It may be my favorite wrestling movie unapologetically and unironically, because when you can mix the early 2000s wrestling with a road trip movie, and we're playing Lit's My Own Worst Enemy to open it up, talking about Ready to Rumble. This movie is dumber than dog shit, and I love every second of it.
It is
You
so
have
stupid. I'm here for it.
yeah, David Arquette, who also has a great wrestling documentary about himself.
Yes.
What's the first? It's James Caan's kid.
Scott Conn.
Scott Conn. They're huge wrestling fans, and their favorite wrestler is Jimmy the King, played by Oliver Platt. Yes,
It's some of the most random casting ever.
The bodied embodiment of a wrestler, Oliver Platt. And you have Joey Pants running around with this amazing like wig and frill jacket. DDP is the bad guy. You have so many early 2000s WCW wrestlers are in it.
You got Goldberg. You got Sting. Rey Mysterio.
The Shermanator is in it from American Pie. All in all, this is just
Bigelow.
Yeah, it is a sweaty, gross time capsule of 2001 for me. You have a smoking hot Rose McGowan. You have a hilarious turn by oh my god, I just lost his name.
Now?
Yes, as the trainer, the old school Stu Hart-esque trainer.
It's like Gus Manzini.
Yeah.
Something like
who's just turning everybody into pretzels.
Sal Bandini. Yeah, he's totally Stu Hart. And again, how did they get him in this movie? WCW was bleeding money at this point, and I guess they bled money in that direction. Because this was an attempt by WCW at gaining more popularity, because this is at the tail end of the Monday Night Wars between WWE and WCW, and things were not looking good in the year 2000 when this movie came out for WCW. So what do? They blew more money, a lot of money, making this movie, which bombed. Critically, financially, everything. It bombed. I don't care though. It's super entertaining. It's fun. You get to see so many wrestlers. It's goofy. There's memorable lines. David Arquette hams it up this whole movie. I will rule you. Yes. Oliver Platt looks like he's having the best time in this movie, playing this washed up wrestler, on the road to a comeback. It's absurd. I feel that one probably deserves its own lengthy review. It's like a movie that could only been made at that point in time, and it did nothing to help WCW. It only put more of the nails in the coffin.
Yep.
One of the reasons being, in their infinite wisdom, they made David Arquette the WCW heavyweight champion, which no one, except for Vince Russo, was happy about, including apparently David Arquette was like, I don't think we should do this. He was not down with this idea.
Now,
if there's a bad idea in wrestling, Vince Russo will come up with it.
I love it. Like I said, between the juvenile jokes in it, I mean, to this day, it's the only reason I know that a diamond upside down is a pussy. There's just it just tickles like my inner child to just want to just watch it. You have some bang, it's classic late 90s, early 2000s alt rock just cranking. Oh, we're all dressed 90s terrible. It's just such a fun movie.
It's just we were teenagers when that came out, and it's just that movie reminds me of our childhood.
Yeah,
it does, and it probably won't have the same quite meaning to everyone else, but we watched it in high school and we instantly started quoting it, and it's a movie we have been talking about for over 20 years, and I love it. I'll throw one more in here at the end. It was an animated movie. See, to come out last year or the year before, it went straight to streaming on Paramount. It's called Rumble. It's a pro wrestling movie about giant monsters, kaiju's, basically. And it's an animated movie, about this town where it's from 2021. This wrestling arena is the heart of this small community, but the big star wrestler disappeared many years earlier, and they want to bring in this big star wrestler's son to kind of carry on the legacy, but the son's like a total loser. Only it's an animated movie about giant monsters. So it's not a fantastic movie by any means, but it's a fun pro wrestling movie aimed at kids, and I had a good time with it. If you have Paramount Network, it's worth a watch, especially if you have kids. Yeah. Rumble.
I will one last thing I'll throw out, because I know a lot of you are thinking, I'm not going to watch professional wrestling, and I get it. But if you are curious to dip your toe into pro wrestling, but you want the cinematic experience, I believe it's still streaming on Tubi, but you can watch the late great Lucha Underground, because there are a lot of modern day wrestlers who are very young wrestling there, and it's just wrestling. It's just plain old professional wrestling, but it's filmed like a telenovela, and it is fantastic. Because it's like a whole story. Like it's a soap opera, literally. We always joke about how, professional wrestling were soap operas for men. Well, this one was like, well, what if we were a soap opera? But also some crazy lucha libre style wrestling was happening. It's insane to watch it, because again, there's like these huge, long, intricate storylines, not wrestling storylines, like telenovela storylines that are taking place while like intercutting like real professional wrestler matches. It's a blast.
Nobody does wrestling like Mexico, and man, I love them for it. On one last note with the pro wrestling movies, are you aware about the lost 80s pro wrestling movie called Blood Circus?
Now, I have seen a movie called WrestleManiac, but I've not heard of Blood Circus.
So Blood Circus, this guy who, it's a weird story behind this guy who sold like fake jewelry through the mail, decided to finance a wrestling movie, and he got several pro wrestlers, including Ox Baker was in it, and it was like a science fiction horror wrestling movie, a bizarre combination. But it was only released, they would like take it on tour and show it in towns, and never got like an official like full theatrical release, never got a video release, and it is apparently now lost to time.
Oh.
It was screened a bunch, it was reviewed, nobody can find a copy of it. All we have are stories about people. Apparently it's terrible. It's real dumb. But look it up on YouTube, because man, it is an interesting story behind that. And it's one, if somebody ever manages to uncover a copy of it, I'm definitely going to watch.
And maybe Vinegar Syndrome will do it, because I know they actually got a copy. They just restored Wrestling with Shadows and put it out on Blu-ray. They also did the Glow documentary. So here's looking at you, Vinegar Syndrome. There's also a movie out there I've not seen, except for the cover a million times, called Monster Brawl, that I believe has Kevin Nash in it, and it's about, in fact, monsters wrestling each other.
Yep. It's supposed to be real bad, but I'd still watch it. I don't care.
So what we're saying is, it's still real to me, damn it. No, it's a good time, man. And some of these movies are great. Some of them are trash, but regardless, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna have fun. And
every movie
at the beginning, I was gonna say real quick, wrap that up. Is at the heart of it all, kind of what professional wrestling's all about.
Every movie we talked about is worth a watch. Honestly, good or bad, they're all entertaining. And some are more sad and heart wrenching, but it's just like No Holds Barred, Body Slam. They're not great movies, but man, they're fun. And sometimes it's nice to go watch a fun, dumb movie. Also, harkening back to our second live stream done together about Nicolas Cage. I want a Nicolas Cage led movie about Jake the Snake Roberts. Come on.
Oh, he's
right
playing
there.
Jake the Snake?
No, I'm saying I said it back then. They should make it. Nicolas Cage could play a great Jake the Snake Roberts. Yeah. I could see that. And as usual, it's just like he could pull that off. I want that to happen. He's already got the hairline for it. Come on. I want to see Nicolas Cage cutting some Jake the Snake promos on people. That would be awesome. And that's like Jake, even when he was 25, always looked, 49 to 55. So yeah. Nicolas Cage, he can play Jake the Snake.
See, I am 100 because you go and you're like, did you hear that Nicolas Cage is making a professional wrestling movie based on a wrestler from the 80s? In your mind immediately, you're just expecting one of those like, let me tell you something, brother. Like he just tooted a line right before the camera rolled. But then you get Nicolas Cage, he's like, I'll tell you about Gideon. You get the snake there. The snake's going to eat you. Like that. Oh my God, yes.
And I want to see Nicolas Cage doing the Heroes of Wrestling scenes where he's blasted out of his mind. Play 21, I'll get 22. Cheetah cards. And goes out there and starts making out with a snake in the middle of the ring.
Oh Heroes of Wrestling. Look, Nicolas Cage, I know you're probably not watching. But if I can put this out into the ether, make this happen. Wrestling movies are big right now. Let's capitalize. It honestly would be better than anything else I saw him in this year. So yeah, let's make this happen. I've never wanted a movie more than I want this right now.
Yes.
And again, there's talk about that Chris Hemsworth Hogan movie, which again is like, okay, interesting. But again, kind of like Flair, Hogan, I don't know how well you do a Hogan character movie or biopic without
I think it'd be real hard.
Just doing it, just be caricatures. Like who's gonna you're gonna do the Macho Man without just being like, oh yeah, like how do you portray the real man and not the cartoon that he was?
Well, I mean, in all fairness, Macho Man was apparently amped up like that all of the time.
Again, toots, just rails.
And I don't know, have you watched Young Rock at all?
I haven't. I've seen stills of it where they have the wrestlers. I know there's one very famously of a scene from the locker room that based on the timeline, it looks like they have just a giant black man playing who should be Shawn Michaels. He's in the jeans, he's got the Kango hat. You're like, is that? And a vest over a t-shirt. You're like, is that Shawn Michaels?
I think that was supposed to be Booker T, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. No, it's a really good show, especially if you like pro wrestling. Apparently it's been canceled, but it goes across a few different eras of wrestling, and it's a very well done show. I can't believe how well they did with the casting of that show. The guy that got to play Macho Man, and I mean he's on it a ton, did a great job. Yeah. They got, the casting for the Iron Sheik and even Andre, they did such a good job. And I can't believe they managed to find somebody who looks as much like The Rock as they did to play him, in his initial WWF run. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I'm sad they canceled it. I think it's a good show.
Speaking of Andre, we haven't talked about Andre. The Princess Bride, but there's a great Andre documentary on Mac that they did a few years ago, and it's fantastic about what his life was like, and it's very sad, but also just amazing that he was able to do what he did at his size
for as long as he did.
Yeah,
because the last 10 years of his career, he was battling serious health problems and a bad back, and has still managed to perform at least on some level. And there's actually an older documentary on YouTube. It's only about an hour long from 2011 or so. That really well done. It's one I honestly cried during it. It was so tragic and well done. But there's some that's the thing. YouTube is such a wealth of good wrestling content like that, and all these mini documentaries. And there's so many. Yeah, one channel I watch called WrestleMania, and a lot of them come out of the UK.
Mhm.
Wrestling's big in the UK. A funny channel I recommend. It's called Wrestle Me. It's hilarious. These two British dudes talking about golden era pro wrestling, and it's awesome.
Yeah. The one for me from the UK was always OSW. And they kind of covered everything. And then the big one, the one that I still like follow, the kind of just every once in a while, like, oh, I wonder what's happening in the world of wrestling, is Steven Larson going in Raw, because I'm also a child, so to name your wrestling show Going in Raw, primo
Yes.
junior high joke for me, and I love it. But I'm almost wrestled out. I don't know about you.
Yes.
So we'll end there with our wrestling, and I'm a little upset, Logan, because you kind of left us on this cliffhanger of a pizza story, and I don't know where we are. I mean, is there a second pizza? Did that second pizza have fish or not? I'm a little upset by not knowing what's happening with this pizza.
Well, I bet he got his pizza. Logan will go full Karen on somebody.
So that's the thing, though. Like,
Man.
he's quiet. Like he hasn't said anything. I'm like, do you need to go bail your friend out of jail because they brought him a second fish pizza?
Yes.
But I'm glad you guys got to hang out with us tonight. I'm glad we finally got to talk about kind of something that has always been in our lives while never being. I never viewed us as like wrestle guys. It was never something we talked about. We never like, oh, hey Nick, come on over. I've bought the pay-per-view. Like, it was never that childhood. But it's just a weird how we all just kind of found our way to it in weird ways, in and out of life. But it's something we never really just sat down and talked about.
Well, unless we were playing WCW versus NWO Revenge.
That's
World Tour. Yes.
Well, I think that's going to do it for this month's live. Now, I do want to go ahead and plug again our YouTube, where we have weekly reviews. This week's review that's up, it's been up since Sunday, because that's when the reviews go up. Every Sunday at 4 p.m. Is Livewire, which is one of my favorite action movies of the 90s. And as I said in that review, I'll say it now. Yeah, I said it. Suck it, Speed. Livewire. And then this week is one that Nick and I reviewed together, called The First Power. And it's a fun review, and it's even more fun movie, so go check it out. And then coming up next month is no theme review, so I'm not sure what the reviews are going to be on YouTube, but I can tell you this for certain. Next month, for our live, we're going to finally be breaking down our top 10 and bottom 5 movies of 2023. We all should be mostly caught up and ready to talk about the good and the bad of last year's movie selection. And we're going to do that, mark your calendars, on February 24th. We're going to end February with a bang that most everybody else has done at least 2 months before us. But no. We waited because by then you're going to want to know other people's opinions. They've all wasted theirs. Then you get ours. You get the definitive list.
We're going to do it right.
Yeah. No more opinions. We give the facts at the end of February. So make sure you're tuning in for that. That will be here at twitch.tv/The Movie Club Emporium. And again, our YouTube is youtube.com/@The Movie Club Emporium. Where, again, every week, new reviews, including a review that we filmed earlier today. for the Iron Claw. We'll be going up to the 1st of February. So tune in for that. Nick, do you have any final thoughts?
No, I'm looking forward to talking about our favorite movies next month, the best and worst. I think 2023 was a pretty good year for movies, an interesting year, and there was some real bombs in there. So I'm curious to get your takes. I think we'll have some differences on our list, to say the least, but I look forward to talking about that.
I as well. Yeah, there will definitely be some interesting entries on both of our lists, both good and bad, and I'm excited to talk about it. So that'll wrap it up for this month's live. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us. In case you're curious, and you may be, you may not be, these go away right now on the after so long on Twitch. We're not an old enough channel or have enough content available for us to keep it up longer. But the hard behind the scenes work of sweet off camera Amber records these, sometimes absolute fun times, sometimes utter dumpster fires, but they're always entertaining, and they're all available for you to watch for free. We have a Patreon page. Everything on there is free for now, because we are nowhere near good enough to ask you for money. But these lives are recorded and then posted there in their entirety, for you to be able to watch. So if you want to go back here, a couple months from now, and you're like, I wonder what their opinion was on Jeff Daniels movies. Well, by God, Patreon.com, the Movie Club Emporium, you can watch that video in its entirety for free and know exactly how we feel about Jeff Daniels and the modern day masterpiece that is Chasing Sleep.
Also, I will say, watch the Grand Tour. Just watch the Grand Tour. Chasing Sleep, I hate you.
Okay, so I was getting ready to wrap this up like right now, but it looks like we have some new development on Pizzagate. So you had to take a shower. Were we washing off pizza or blood, Logan? Or was it a little bit of both? How violent was this pizza experience?
You make those kids eat that pizza. You work too damn hard for that pizza.
Yeah, I like that. I see. I'm glad. Because honestly, we were gonna sign off. But just know that if this hadn't happened, this live Unsolved Mysteries update just now, I wouldn't have been able to sleep tonight because I was like, what happened with the pizza? And yeah, the kids they usually steal all the cheesy bread.
Who gets anchovy pizza in 2024? Who gets anchovy pizza anyway? I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought that was just a running joke of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, then I found out that's a real thing.
Do they bring you a fishless pizza, but they messed up and put goat cheese on it or something odd like that?
This is Washington. They put bougie stuff like that in our pizza, so
we don't have time for that here. It's pepperoni or bust. Otherwise, it wouldn't be hot and ready.
Was it hey Logan, was that what, Rose's Pizza? Or that one in downtown? There's two pizza places that I remember in Cheney. Yep, Rose's. People love their damn cheesy bread.
See, that's Amber's a breader. I don't know how to make that not sound terrible. Her bread's her favorite part.
Cheesy bread is just pizza minus toppings that I love. So I'm just gonna have pizza.
Yeah. Ashton's that way. He's like, I'll give me Pizza Hut if I want wings, get me Domino's if I want bread. And I'm like, how about we just eat pizza?
Buffalo chicken cheesy bread. Man, that sounds good. Okay, I would try that.
Yeah.
And I absolutely think you should sue them for mental anguish and their children's trauma from the anchovies.
Tell them you're
How dare
deathly
you?
tell them you're deathly allergic to anchovies. They can't not prove it. Also, that's how I'm able to finally order the taco pizza without them putting onions on it. Because they will do it even if you say no. Tell them you're deathly allergic and they will stop. They'll even double check it at the window now. Hey man, there ain't any onions on this pizza, are they? I want to kill this guy.
Oh god, I bet it did make your house smell bad. That's awful. We cover the hard-hitting topics here.
We really did. This is like more enthralling than like the last 2 hours of wrestling talk. Well done,
What
sir.
have you been doing?
Well done. And with that, because I can't top that. We will go ahead and say, we'll go ahead and ring the bell on this match of a stream. It's been a lot of fun.
It has.
A lot of fun.
I love talking about this.
So again, join us next month for the definitive best and worst of list. No other best and worst list counts until you get ours at the end of February. February 24th at 9 p.m. Central Standard Time. And that's something we'll kind of talk about. I have some thoughts, and I want your guys' opinions. So get those comments in, get those messages. You know, even be better is if you go to YouTube and leave comments there on those videos. It raises the engagement. At 4 p.m. on a Sunday is a good time for videos to go up. If you like doing these at 9 o'clock at night on a Sunday or Saturday, whatever day it is we're doing this on. It's a weird time because Nick and I are 2 hours apart, so finding the happy medium for both of us is one thing. But we do want to maximize your guys' involvement, so make sure you let us know. And until then, I've been Jason.
I'm Nick. Arrivederci. See you at work, Logan.
Hey guys, have a good one. Bye.